in it. Because if you believe in it, that's all he needs. He just needs the belief of the church, because he's just making known the mind of the church, right? The mind of the church is that we believe that Mary is immaculately conceived. And so when he decrees it, he's decreeing it with the consent of the church behind his decree. So that has to be there, because he can't decree in opposition to the consent of the church. He cannot. However, when Vatican I says that the Pope is infallible and not from the consent of the church, he's infallible in and of its, the declaration is infallible in and of itself and not from the consent of the church. It's not saying that the consent of the church is not a necessity. It's saying that the consent of the church does not make it infallible. It's God who makes it infallible. That's all Vatican I was saying. But the Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, take that passage or that sentence from Vatican I, and they deduce from it that the Pope can decree in complete opposition to the church, which is that's not even anywhere near what it's saying.
Yeah, that's really strange to me, because I think that anybody with a basic knowledge of church history would know that what that clause is meant to reject the Gallican position. It's meant to reject the position that obviously, like, the Pope comes up, makes a decree, and then receives its like juridical validity after, like, a sort of afterwards, when the bishops all give them the thumbs up.
Yeah.
Christian, that's very strange.
If you don't mind, can you just give me 2 minutes? I'll be right back if you don't mind.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so I guess I can answer some, or I can talk about Gallicanism. Yeah, I mean, Gallicanism, that was one of the craziest movements within the church. Gallicanism basically held that there was some sort of consequent necessity with the consent of like councils and the Pope's decrees. So basically, Gallicanism would definitely differ from what we're talking about, insofar as we're talking about the fact that the Pope needs to, from the fountain of revelation and from the theological loci, bring forward the teaching, especially from sacred scripture, bring forward the teaching of Christ and bring forward the teaching of the church, the traditional teaching of the church. And two, insofar as there's like this weird sort of idea of actualization that comes with the Gallican view. So yeah, the Gallicans are absolutely awful. I hate the Gallicans. I mean, basically, Gallicanism is also French-centered, right? Yeah, basically. Help me understand of eternity. Okay, oh, he's back. Never mind. I'll answer your of eternity question later. I was just telling them about Gallicanism. Because it's really strange to me, because it seems like, I don't know that much about, as I mentioned before, like, papal dogma is not the thing that I focus on a lot.
Yeah.
Or like even just kind of a general awareness of church history would kind of explicate that whole situation for me. Okay, so you can continue on now.
Well, you brought up a good point, Gallicanism. We got to talk about that, because that's the context of what Vatican I is really addressing, right? Gallicanism is a movement that started, I want to say, in the French, with the French in the French world, but I think it was also in the Dutch. The Dutch world. So there were some bishops that were Gallicans in the Catholic Church, and what Gallicanism is, it's really a political movement where, because you had monarchs, you had kings, they wanted the bishop to be their pawn. They wanted to control the bishop, right? And they didn't want the bishop to have any hindrance of what he could teach in his own diocese or in his local diocese. And so, but the hindrance is the papacy. That, the bishop cannot teach against what the papacy teaches, right? Again, it's a political movement. That's what the monarchs wanted. So the Gallicanism is a teaching that says that if the Pope wants to do anything, he first has to ask permission from the bishops before he acts. That's what Gallicanism is, right? So when Vatican I is declaring that the Pope does not need permission or consent to decree that the consent is not necessary for something to be infallible, they're directly addressing Gallicanism, the heresy of Gallicanism. And a lot of people ask me, well, why didn't they just say that the Pope needs uh, he needs the consent of the church in terms of agreement or faith, right? Because that would have been very confusing if they are going to be refuting a heresy that is saying that the Pope does need the consent. And if they say it in those terms, again, consent can mean agreement and it can mean permission. That's very confusing. So if they say that, they're actually reaffirming the very dogma or very heresy, I should say, that they're trying to refute,
Hmm.
right? So it's very necessary for them to have uh, first rid of Gallicanism because it was very big at the time. So they had to get rid of it. And that's one of the reasons why they even held the council, Vatican I,
Hmm.
is Gallicanism. That's what they were trying to refute. Um, and now it looks lopsided when Vatican I is telling you all this power that the Pope has. It looks very lopsided, right? Because, okay, what about the bishops? What folks don't know is that they were going to balance that out by talking about the power of the bishops at Vatican I. And we actually have those documents uh, uh, that they actually had that they were going to vote on. But Vatican I was cut short because of a war, and the war cut it short. And then it was never officially closed at Vatican I. Vatican II closed Vatican I. That's the first thing they did is they closed Vatican I, and they picked up in Lumen Gentium the discussions that Vatican I bishops were going to have on the authority of the bishops.
Hmm.
And so when Vatican II came along, people think that it was a contradiction to Vatican I because it emphasized collegiality, where
Hmm.
Vatican I is emphasizing supremacy and infallibility and the Pope's power. It's not a contradiction. They actually go hand in hand, and you can't have one without the other. The church does not operate where you can have the Pope acting by himself against the bishops, and the church does not operate where the bishops act by themselves without the Pope. They always act in unison together. That's how things work. That's how things normally work, and we've seen
Hmm.
that in history. And this is why the Eastern Orthodox cannot give us a single example of either even in the second millennium where the Pope acted alone. There's no such thing. And they actually admit this. Like Ubi Petrus has admitted this. He's like, of course he wouldn't act alone. That's not the point. He says the point is that he could potentially act alone, and that's what we're afraid of.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
that
what's funny is that actually I had read the De Ecclesia. And I read actually some of the original documentation in Vatican One. I read Kloitkin's Relatio. I read some of the comments from the bishops because there's an interesting section there, and this is another connection with Lumen Gentium. For a lot of people who say that Vatican II had certain novelties about the dogma of extra ecclesiam nulla salus. The original De Ecclesia, which was going to be promulgated at Vatican I, talked about individuals who are outside of the church by no fault of their own and are still receive graces from the church. So it is kind of funny how Vatican II in this way ends up really being a completion of Vatican I in Lumen Gentium.
yeah, yeah, it is, and that's the beauty of it. Once you understand it's a completion and not a contradiction, I think it changes the whole perspective of how you look at Vatican II. Especially in this context when you contextualize the papacy. Um, but now we got to talk about what happened in between Vatican I and Vatican II, because there is a reason why the maximalist position is dominant in the understanding of the papacy, at least
Hmm.
amongst Catholics and Orthodox and Protestants. There is a reason, right? It's not an accident. Um, if you want me to get into that now, I can. It's up to you. If you have another question that we can discuss.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we can get into that. There's kind of a funny thing with this actually. I was once reading because I definitely do. While I am a very large respecter of the tradition of the manuals and the scholastics between the two councils,
Yeah.
there's this funny like newspaper cartoon that I saw and from the era, and it was like I want a new papal encyclical with breakfast every morning. You know, I want to be able to read a new papal encyclical so the popes can tell us what to do. And yeah, there definitely is and I was talking about this in my discussions with traditional Thomist. If anybody wants to watch that, is there is like this sort of weird conception of the uh, the role of the Pope as judge being eclipsed a little bit by the role of the Pope as teacher.
Yeah.
So we get the Pope saying a lot, and obviously, like even the Pope understands that when he says different things, he means to enforce his authority in different ways. So, like an allocution is different than an encyclical, which is different than an apostolic constitution. All of these are different levels of authority, and it doesn't mean to bind us in the same degree upon each of them. But oftentimes, for the average guy who's trying to go and read these types of documents, it's hard to distinguish between those various different degrees in the documents.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can go into the time between the councils.
So, and just to touch a little bit on what happened at Vatican One, just to understand what happened after Vatican One. So during Vatican One, there were three groups of bishops that were kind of like creating their own clique, right? There was what was called the Maximalists, which is what we're going against. The Maximalists wanted the Pope to have all the power because they were the bishops or cardinals that were his right hand men at the time, right? So they if he has the power, they have the power, right? And then you had the majority bishops who were kind of like moderate, right? Which is what they're the ones that won out in the debates between the
That would
three.
be like Cardinal Pecci, Leo the XIII, and
Yes.
Clicken might have been in that clique as well. But yeah, I have read about this a little bit. If anybody wants like the background, a little bit of background knowledge,
Yeah.
Jedin, his volumes of history are really good when he writes about the different the disagreements within the Curia under Blessed Pius IX. Sorry to cut you off.
No, good.
Go.
This is good. I like when you give references because folks need to learn about this stuff. And so that's the side that won out, right? And then you had the minority bishops who were semi-influential in the dogma of Vatican One, but they were the ones that wanted to see in the actual dogma that the Pope needs some consent before he acts, not necessarily permission, but at least agreement. That he needs that agreement behind his, like they need to say something about the Pope needing to be in union with the bishops when he acts. He can't be in opposition. Things to that nature, right? And they kept trying to get something in the dogma, and they kept getting rejected by the majority bishops, right? So now the question is, well, why is the maximalist view the loudest view? Because the maximalist position at Vatican I, or at least the bishops that were at Vatican I that wanted it to be to win out, they had the loudest voice in the media, right? So when the Vatican I council was completed, well, not really completed because they couldn't close it, but you know what I mean, when it was done, they actually went out to the media and to the world, and they told everyone that their side won. So, and so that was the perception is, oh, the maximalists won. And if you actually read Vatican One, I can see people reading it that way, right? When you read it, it does sound like the Pope is an autocrat. It does sound like the Pope has all this power and it's unbalanced. It does sound like on the surface, if you don't understand the backgrounds behind it, you could deduce from it that, right? Which is why I don't fault folks for thinking that way. It's going to take a long time to untangle that confusion, right? So, but how do we know that they're wrong according to the actual council and what it promulgated? Well, the best way is to know how the popes interpreted Vatican I after Vatican I, right? So, in this whole maximalist view from 1870 of Vatican I all the way up to Vatican II, and even to our day, has been dominant in the Catholic Church in terms of like how lay people think about the papacy,
Yeah.
right? And it's still
I
going
was
on.
going to mention that there is like a little bit of a touch of lay piety that colors the general view.
Yes.
And because really, when you read the magisterial documents, like the magisterial documents are quite clear about the sort of moral demands that the Pope has when it comes to his communion with bishops, and even bishops with their own priests, and that type of collegial relationship and fraternal relationship that needs to happen. But a lot of lay people think that the Pope kind of just he's kind of like how we would think of the CEO of a company. he's like how Donald Trump runs,
Yeah.
his business. He can just kind of do what he wants and throw everyone aside. And if you say anything else that's cringe and weak, and you're not like a real leader.
Right.